and construction. The standard contract between owner and construction manager for which the work is to be performed by trade contractors is CCDC 5A. The construction manager acts as a limited agent of the owner, providing advisory services and administering and overseeing the overall contracts between the owner and the trade contractors, which would use a CCDC 17. Under this model, the owner would contract directly with multiple contractors to perform the work. From an organizational chart perspective, and to make it easier to comprehend from a graphic perspective, you'll notice that the owner, in this instance, ladies and gentlemen, retains all of the consultants, retains a construction manager, and then ends up entering into a trade contractor agreement with every single trade. Under this model, the owner would have multiple contracts and direct contractual relationships for people like the painter, the tiler, the drywaller, the wall covering trade, the furniture trade, the concrete trade if you're doing a brand new building, or the steel trade. Like, they would have a contract directly with every single trade that would be providing services. The direct contractual relationship between the construction manager and the owner is an advantage. And it's an advantage because it allows the owner to negotiate directly with these trades, to engage them directly, to give them direction directly without having to worry about anybody in the middle. The opportunity to call bids sequentially is also an advantage here because it saves time by permitting a start on construction before all documentation has been completed. This would be considered as fast-tracking the project. The construction manager would be able to provide construction advice during the design process, which would allow for a more collaborative design process where the consultants or the consulting team can learn from the contractor or the construction manager's experience overall. The construction manager would carefully monitor the costs and balance and balance the design with the construction because they would be able to see all of the costs from where they sit, but they would also be able to provide some insight into how to save costs over time as well. And the owner would have full control over the design and the construction process because the owner has a direct contractual relationship to both entities. So what are some of the disadvantages? Well, the owner contracts directly with the trades, and even though that is an advantage, it is also a disadvantage because the owner will assume all the risks related to construction performance. You also have to remember that construction commences before the total costs are known, and the owner does not know what the total project is going to cost them with any certainty. Okay, there's a potential for less control over the financial cost in an unstable construction market. The owner assumes the risk of any of the necessary changes to the overall budget. Added costs are also involved in selecting in reviewing who the construction manager will be. And of course, there's going to be a greater administrative burden for the owner as well, because now the owner has to pay all of these different trade contractors and review their invoices and process their checks and everything else, whereas under any of the other two project delivery methods that we have reviewed, the owner would be cutting a single check on a monthly basis to one, maybe two entities at best. And finally, when fast tracking is employed, early design decisions are not easily changeable through the design stage. This might lead to potential change orders during construction and or end up delaying construction. For example, if you have already covered off the foundation and the construction is commenced for the foundation of a building, and you decide you want to make it wider or larger, you may not necessarily be able to do so because it's already being built on site. And as a result, to go through having to change it, you would have to end up removing aspects of construction or demolishing aspects of construction and then rebuilding, which would lead itself to additional costs as well as time. There are also other disadvantages here, which include for complex relationships. The direct communication may be suppressed between the owner and the consultant, or the contractor, and the traditional roles may end up being very confused here. There is a huge potential for adversarial relationships. Can you imagine if the painter turns around and says that the drywaller did not do a good enough job and therefore the painter is not going to be able to paint the building, or that the drywaller's work was really crappy and crummy, that any work that the painter does is not going to look so great? This will all lead to adversarial relationships overall, which the owner is ultimately then responsible for trying to sort through, because the owner holds the contractual relationship with each of these entities. I'm going to switch gears here for just about a second because I want to talk to you about the Occupational Health and Safety Act. This is a statutory act that is in every single province, which determines who is going to be responsible for the overall health, safety, and well-being of all workers when they are on site. Under this particular model, whereby the owner is contracting directly with all of the individual subtrades, the owner will end up acting as the constructor, which is a defined term in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. What this means is that the owner is now ultimately responsible for the health, the safety, and the well-being of every single person on their site. And heaven forbid, should contractors fail to follow health and safety protocols, or should there be an injury or a death on site, the owner ultimately becomes responsible here and opens themselves up to potential claims, risk, and liability. So it's important to understand that the Occupational Health and Safety Act plays a fundamental role in construction projects, but it's also important to understand what kind of risks and liabilities that the owner may be taking on when they have these direct contractual relationships. And last but not least, the multiple construction contracts will definitely increase the administrative cost as well as the coordination problems and that burden for the owner as well. So the owner will now have to compensate likely by making sure that they've hired enough number of people to work in their office to be there to process all of the different contractual obligations and requirements and to be following them at all times. Now we get into the other type of construction management, and this is for services and construction. The standard contract between owner and construction manager to provide advisory services during the pre-construction phase and perform the required work during the construction phase is CCDC 5B. At the outset, the work is performed on an actual cost basis plus a percentage or a fixed fee, which would be applied to the actual costs. The parties may agree to exercise other options for payment, such as guaranteed maximum price plus a percentage for cost savings, or this particular contract form could also be converted into a stipulated price contract. Looking at the organizational chart for this project delivery method, you will notice that it is very similar to that of the design bid build, whereby the owner sits at the top of the food chain. The owner is responsible for retaining the consultants and the construction manager. However, the construction manager then goes and retains all of the subtrades directly and takes responsibility for the work of the subcontractors or the trade contractors. The direct contractual relationship between the construction manager and the owner is an advantage to this method of construction management. It is an advantage because it allows the owner to provide direct decisions and agreements directly with the construction manager to follow. Okay, unlike the previous model of construction management, the owner had no direct relationship with the had all the direct relationships with the subcontractors, giving them the ability to direct the subtrades in whichever way they wanted. Here, the advantage is that they can direct the construction manager, who then takes all the responsibility for the work of the subtrades or the trade contractors. Under this model, there is an opportunity to call bids sequentially, thus saving time by permitting to start on construction before all documentation has been completed, and so this method is conducive to fast tracking. Under this particular method, the construction manager is able to provide advice during the design process, which also allows for a higher level of collaboration between the designer or the consultant and the construction manager. This also allows the construction manager to bring some of their trades to the table to provide advice on matters pertaining to constructability, again allowing for greater levels of collaboration. And finally, the construction manager will act as the builder, which facilitates the collaboration with the consultant, but also allows the construction manager to carefully monitor the costs and the balances that apply during the design and the construction phase, because the architect, trade contractors, and construction manager are all independent entities. Under this particular model, some of the disadvantages include that construction commences before the total costs are known. The owner does not know what the total project cost is going to be with any given level of certainty. There is a potential for less control over the final cost in an unstable construction market, whereby the owner would still end up assuming the risk for the necessary changes to the overall budget. Think of the pandemic times, where costs in construction in some cases doubled, if not tripled, in certain aspects of the industry. Materials became unavailable due to supply chain related issues, and moving from one material to another generally lended itself in additional costs. If there were projects that were following this particular delivery method, the owner was left holding the bag on additional costs, okay? And then there's also the added costs, ladies and gentlemen, and the time that goes into selecting a construction manager. The method of payment is a cost plus fee, whereby there's potential for any unnecessary charges. Because, you know, when you have a drywall contract for $1 million, the construction manager's fee in this instance would be, say, 2% or 4%, up to, I've seen as much as 10% on top for the construction manager's fee, depending on the size, the scale, and the complexity of the project in itself. And finally, the fast tracking of early design decisions is not easily changed. Like in the previous construction management model, there would be that concern. So if design decisions have been made up front, you would not be able to easily go and change them, because chances are that work or the construction of that work has already commenced. So, let us now compare design bid build versus construction management versus design build. And you'll see that the latter two delivery methods are more conducive to shortening the length of time of any given project. with construction management, the added advantage is that you get that extra collaboration between the construction manager and the design team. However, ladies and gentlemen, you may be sitting there thinking, wow, if it saves time, likely going to save some money, why wouldn't we just use these methods all the time? And the answer to that is that it largely depends on the size, the complexity of the project, as well as the owner's overall appetite for risk. If you have a risk-adverse owner, they may not want to go to construction management, for example, or to a design bid build approach. They may want to go design build. Yes, they may end up spending a little bit more money. However, at the same time, they know exactly what they're going to get in terms of making sure their program is met at a certain fixed price. Okay? So each method has its own pros and cons, and it will largely depend on the owner. It will largely depend on how risk adverse that owner is, as well as the owner's ability in terms of financially being able to take on risk, as well as the owner's individual ability to take on the administrative burden of any given project. So now we get into the integrated project delivery. This is a relatively new project delivery method that emerged in the United States in the early part of the 21st century. It's been in Canada for about 10 to 12 years, maybe a little bit longer, but is not as widely used. The integrated project delivery method requires a single multi-party contract signed by the owner, the designer, and the builder, as well as with major trades such as mechanical and electrical, and it has contractual financial incentives to enhance the collaboration amongst the parties. The other key participants that may join the multi-party contract for the overall success of the project may include your mechanical, your electrical, your concrete trade, and or any other major trades that may be involved in the given project.